Hello, welcome to the FCCJ. I'm Joël Legendre Koizumi, correspondent of France Télévisions, TV5 World and RTL Radio, and I'm your MC today for this press conference on the COP21. COP21 is the major international climate conference to open in Paris on Sunday. COP21 is also known as the 2015 Paris Climate Conference, and for the first time in over 20 years of UN negotiations, it will try to achieve a legally binding and universal agreement on climate with the aim of keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius for our home, the Earth. Around 196 parties involved, with heads of state and governments also, who are expected to attend at the Bourget near Paris, this critical meeting that could set the tone for the health of our planet for decades to come. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. It will be the 21st yearly session of the Conference of the Parties to the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The conference will bring together countries in an attempt to avoid unrepairable impact on ecosystem and economies, such as cyclones, drought, falling agricultural yields, extinctions of species. Therefore, it's one of the most important diplomatic conferences ever held outside of the general meetings of the UN in New York. Certainly, an unprecedented scale in the history of the climate conference. The Copenhagen conference in 2009 had brought together 120 head of state or head of government. I said it would be organized in Paris at Le Bourget under very high security. US President Obama called on the leaders of all countries, quote, to participate, to come to Paris, to come like him, to the COP21 to show that the world is not afraid of terrorists after the dreadful attacks in Paris on Friday, November 13, with a rate of 130 fellow countrymen killed there. Japan is the 5th largest emitter of CO2 emissions after China, the US, India, and Russia. And Japan is one of the countries regarded as most exposed to impact of climate change. Japan submitted its intended nationally determined contribution in July this year, committing to reduce its greenhouse gas, the GHG, emission by 26% by 2030. This raised concern as Japan used the 2013 level, which came after a huge import of fossil fuels following the Fukushima March 2011 nuclear accident and the closure of nuclear plants. Not everyone was happy about Japan's level. We'll talk about it today. Adding to these different issues, the US created a turmoil recently when John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, said on November 11th that Paris climate deal will not be a legally binding treaty, a contradiction to the principles of the COP. Mr. Kerry emphasized the differences between the US and other nations over how to shift billions of dollars of investment away from fossil fuels and shift it toward greener energy sources. But maybe Mr. Kerry's comments targeted more the Republicans at the US Congress than the international community. French Foreign Minister, Mr. Fabius, just stated that we don't talk maybe of a treaty, but he maintained that this COP21 will be a Paris agreement, and it will be a binding agreement. Let's wait and see. So I talked about this issue already, and I would like to now introduce our 4 eminent specialists to comment on Japan's approach to the COP21. A few days ago, we had the French ambassador, Thierry Dana, who was here. So let me introduce our 4 guest speakers. Now, Hiroyuki Tezuka is the senior industry liaison at KEIDANREN on COP21. He's a senior executive at Japan Steel Corporation, responsible for this climate change policy. Near me, Professor Jun Arima is a former METI official and one of the chief negotiators at COP14, 15, and 16. He's now a senior professor at Tokyo University Graduate School of Public Policies. Dr. Yasuko Kameyama is a former negotiator at COP3, remember the Kyoto Protocol, she was there, and now senior researcher at the National Institute for Environmental Studies responsible for international environmental agreements. On my right side, Tom O'Sullivan is an independent energy and environmental analyst, a former investment banker, and a frequent commentator on global energy and environmental issues. With them, we'll try to see how it's possible to save the world from a coming environmental shock and to talk about how Paris will commit to save the future of the Earth. So, ladies and gentlemen, today I ask you to welcome our today's speaker and show your appreciation. Thank you. The conference will be in English, no interpreter today. Also, please think about putting your mobile phone on matter mode. And we're going to start immediately with the presentation. Each of them will be about 7 to 8 minutes around. And we will start with Mr. O'Sullivan, please. Tom.
Okay, Joel, thank you very much. And also, just before I start, please accept my sympathies to you and all the people of France for what happened in Paris on November 13th. That was a huge tragedy. And thank you all very much for coming today. Actually, Joel said we'll be speaking about Japan. I'm going to spend the first 7 minutes talking about the international situation and just provide you with some numerical understanding or background to the Paris conference. As you know, Ambassador Dana spoke here on Wednesday outlining the diplomatic positions. I also, just before we start, I am a carbon polluter, and maybe many of you are as well. I drive a car, I get on airplanes, I print out my paper. So guilty as charged, Your Honour, in that regard. I also work with a lot of energy companies here in Japan and around Asia, oil and gas companies, renewable energy companies, and I think I know many of you from that interaction, power sector as well, transportation companies, governments, NGOs, etc., and the financial community. And obviously, as you're aware, the insurance sector is bearing a lot of the risk associated with the impact of warming. And as the ambassador said on Wednesday as well, the climate science now is indisputable. We're on the way where we've already hit 1 degree Celsius temperature rise compared with pre-industrial levels, and the IEA, the International Energy Association, which is a subsidiary body of the OECD, says we're en route to 2.7 Celsius. And for those of you familiar with the ppm readings, the CO2 intensity in the atmosphere, they've already hit 400, as announced by the World Meteorological Organization even this week. And again, we're en route to 450 intensity levels, which is the threshold for 2 degrees Celsius. So this is quite a serious situation. And I think the ambassador, when he was here on Wednesday, spoke about the global situation. I'll focus more on the West Pacific, but obviously we've had a lot of climate-related tragedies here in the last 2 years, and obviously in the Philippines, the one you'll be most familiar with in 2013 that cost 10,000 lives. In Vietnam, they're suffering water rises, droughts and floods, etc. And even if you go to the East Pacific in Peru, the oceans there are warming to the extent of 6 degrees Celsius, by all accounts, according to the scientific community. And closer to home, obviously, we've had the Asami Minami tragedy in Hiroshima that cost 70 lives almost 1 year ago. So there is an impact here in Japan as well. Of course, all of you are familiar with the China situation, probably the worst air quality in the world at the moment, and also the highest absolute levels of carbon pollution. This is a chart that I've taken, and excuse me if I have to go very fast here today, but we can hand these out later. But this is a chart from Munich Re, the German reinsurance company, that shows the number of climate events that have happened since 1980 through 2014. So you can see we're moving towards 1,000 serious climatic events per year. They break it down by meteorological events, water-related and climatological events. The first being, would include the Philippines disaster. The second would include Hiroshima. The third would include the droughts that, for example, California is experiencing. This is just a chart that shows the CO2 emissions by year. So we're fast approaching, according to Lord Stern in the UK, whom some of you may be familiar with, we're fast approaching about 50 gigatons per year of emissions. So this is these rates of increase are have increased exponentially. This is the cumulative emissions clock. If any of you haven't seen it. So again, we're approaching 600 billion tons of carbon in the atmosphere, cumulative tons of carbon in the atmosphere so far. And I think every 5 minutes, this is going up by 100,000 tons. And actually, while we'll be in this room, I've quickly done the calculation. I think there will be 2 million tons of CO2 into the atmosphere while we're in this room today. So again, just to look back at the history of some of these COPs that my colleagues have been involved in. Back in 1988, obviously, the UN FCCC was established, but unfortunately, after that, emissions continued to rise. Again, the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, I think, again, emissions continued to rise. Copenhagen, 2009, that's where President Obama burst into the room with Hillary Clinton, demanding some action from the BRIC countries, South Africa, China, etc. So, and there was, a positive outcome from that. I think it wasn't entirely negative. And this is the Rio +20 summit in 2012. I think Lord Stern is now saying we're moving towards 55 billion tons of CO2 per annum into the atmosphere by 2030, based on the INDCs that have been submitted. So the reason we're here today is, to discuss whether this 21st conference since 1992 will make a difference to the climate outcomes. And as I said here, obviously the outcome is the most important thing. This was President Obama in the Philippines on November 17th, where himself and Secretary of State Kerry seemed to be very committed in terms of delivering climate change policies, at least in the United States, as one of their senior legacy issues. And of course, we all know as well that he recently vetoed the Keystone pipeline that was supposed to transport oil sands from the province of Alberta down to the Gulf of Mexico. So, he is speaking through his legislative action as well, and he's also obviously legislated for the Clean Power Act recently. This is the cumulative emissions. I don't think the ambassador touched on this week, but you can see the United States is leveling off. They're actually reducing their emissions due to the transition from coal to natural gas. European Union, due to a weak economy and probably carbon leakage into the developing countries, they're also reducing. The biggest challenge these days is in Asia. So as you can see, the rise in Asia is very dramatic, particularly China, India, and ASEAN. And maybe this is where Japan can really make a huge difference. Japan's energy intensity to GDP is world record. So I'm pretty confident that the Japanese can actually play a very important role in bringing the energy intensity of the other Asian countries down to a level similar to Japan's. This is the cumulative emissions for each of the countries. As you can see, the United States is still a quarter. China has managed to get up to 10% of the cumulative emissions. Even though it's only been industrializing for the last 30 years. You can see UK, Germany, Russia are all ahead of Japan in terms of cumulative emissions because they started to industrialize early. Again, just back to Asia, if you look at the top 5 emitters, 4 of the 5, if you count Russia as being an Asian country, are actually, Asian. And you can see Indonesia as well recently is now starting to emit very, very huge levels of CO2 due to forest deforestation, etc. So they're about twice Japan's emissions, even though the economy is 20% the size of Japan's. On a per capita basis, the United States obviously dominates. Russia is also, unfortunately, very strong due to their, significant resources and also the climate. If you can see Africa down here at the end, Africa is about 20% of the global population, but it's only 3% of the CO2 emissions. So, that continent has a significant catch-up to go, and we're going to have to, presumably one of the outcomes of the COP will be to monitor what's happening in the developing countries. This is just a chart of GDP to fossil fuel consumption. As you can see, there's a high degree of correlation between GDP, which is now about 75 trillion globally, and fossil fuel consumption. So the trick will be, for my 3 colleagues here, all of whom are going to Paris, will be to how to decouple the energy intensity of the economies and how to reduce the fossil fuel consumption. This is a chart from a colleague of mine in Manchester, shows carbon consumption, and you can see we're firmly on track for a 4 degrees Celsius CO2 increase here. So this is moving at a juggernaut pace. So it's going to be a huge challenge to actually move off that trajectory down into the 2 degrees Celsius that the United Nations is recommending. I'm an accountant by training, so I love these measurement and accounting issues. But of course, CO2 as well presents some huge accounting and measurement issues. We've seen the situation with Volkswagen recently through their diesel engines, the understatement of the CO2 emissions, and then Chinese coal is supposed to be. We understand it's significantly understated to the tune maybe of total German emissions, and then Exxon are being pursued in New York. The New York Attorney General is actually suing Exxon for suppression of CO2 for evidence that they had accumulated over a decade in terms of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere. So that's going to impact, the financial markets, possibly, the banks, etc. The governor of the Bank of England has also come out with some very strong views on divestment and locked-in assets, etc. And just quickly, I know you're all familiar with this, but if we don't cut the CO2, this is potentially some of the outcomes. Temperatures may continue to rise, droughts, heat waves, food shortages, increased heavy and intense rainfalls, hurricanes, sea level. A lot of bad news here, but sea level rises if the Arctic and the Antarctic ice sheets melt, and the Greenland ice sheet as well, and a lot of human migration, which obviously Europe has been is impacted by at the moment. And Kiribati is one Pacific island that's already making plans to vacate and move elsewhere. Christina Figueres, the head of the UNFCCC, has put a figure of $3 to $7 trillion on the impact of climate change per annum if mitigation adaptation efforts are not made. And I'll end there, and thank you very much. I'll hand over to my colleague Arima Sensei. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your presentation and for the timing. Yes, so we're going to hear now Professor Arima.
Thank you very much, Joel, for your kind introduction. And I have a particular sentiment about the COP negotiation process, since I myself was one of the chief negotiators during the post-2013 framework and have participated in COP more than 10 times. So today, I will talk about three things based on my experiences. First, expectations for COP21, and second, Japan's contribution, and future global governance on climate change. And first, let me touch upon expectations for COP21. In addressing COP21, we should clearly understand the evolution of climate regime up to date over time. And Kyoto Protocol was applauded as the first top-down, stringent, and legally binding framework. However, due to its dichotomous framework between developed and developing countries, it could not engage the US and China and developing countries. So it failed to effectively reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. So with this in mind, I myself announced that Japan would never participate in the second period of the Kyoto Protocol at the time of the COP16. Post-2020 framework is most likely to be a bottom-up and flexible framework evolving from Cancun Agreement. Up to now, over 150 countries have already submitted their INDCs. This means that a bottom-up and flexible framework with participation of all countries is far more effective than a top-down and stringent framework with limited coverage. Of course, there are still many things to be resolved, and Dr. Kameyama would perhaps explain in more detail. Some parties are insisting on legally binding nature, not only on the process, but also for the targets themselves. Others are insisting on clear dichotomy between developed and developing countries. However, I assert that such Kyoto Protocol type elements are the recipe for the failure. Utmost priority should be to agree on a framework where the US and China and all major emitters participate in global mitigation efforts, and to establish an effective, constructive, and facilitative pledge and review system. In addition, we should not forget bitter lessons, namely US withdrawal from Kyoto Protocol back in 2001. President Obama is very much keen to play an active role in COP21 for fostering agreement. This is very much welcomed. At the same time, before ratification, we must confirm that agreement continues to be respected and implemented by the new US administration, which is going to start from 2017. So let me move on to Japan's contribution. In July, Japan has submitted its 26% reduction target by 2030 compared to 2013 level. As Joel mentioned, some environmental NGOs are criticizing that Japan's INDC lacks ambition. I would say such criticism lacks proper understanding of Japanese circumstances. Today, I have distributed two materials, Is Japan's INDC Underwhelming? And Evaluation on Emission Reduction Efforts of the INDCs and Expected Global Emissions for your weekend reading stuff. In short, Japan's target is premised to an energy mix based on the very, very delicate balance for overcoming so-called quadrilemma, declining energy self-sufficiency, outflow of national wealth, and rising energy costs, and finally growing CO2 emissions. Under this constraint, I would say that Japan's target is extremely ambitious one. For example, as you can see at the left figure, Japan's marginal cost for reducing greenhouse gas emissions is much, much higher than those of EU and the US. And so taking into account various other indicators other than marginal abatement cost, I would also emphasize that Japan's INDC is very ambitious, as you can see in the radar chart. And I would also add that Japan's INDC is very transparent since its breakdown is fully disclosed. But having said that, obsession with comparison of percentage numbers of mitigation targets is an anachronistic mindset at the time of the Kyoto negotiation. What is to be negotiated at COP21 is not the percentage numbers, but the design of effective present review mechanism. In this regard, Japan can make a valuable contribution. As a pioneer, Japan has been implementing present review and PDCA cycle through voluntary action plans of industries. Though Mr. Tezuka will explain in more detail, in short, it worked very well in Japan. Japan should share its successful experiences with all over the world. And I would also underline the fact that Japan proposed present review scheme already at the time of 1991, as if it had a crystal ball predicting 24 years ahead. Japan's most meaningful contribution to global greenhouse gas emission reduction is through its technology capability. In the short to mid-term, Japan could reduce greenhouse gas emissions in developing countries by disseminating its low-carbon technologies. In the longer term, Japan could lead development of innovative technologies, which would change the shape of long-term emission reduction path. Actually, yesterday, Prime Minister Abe announced Action for Cool Earth 2.0, and one of the pillars was formulation of energy and environment innovation strategy, ranging various technologies from next-generation geothermal, next-generation battery, hydrogen storage and transportation, and artificial photosynthesis. Japan could also utilize the Innovation for Cool Earth Forum, ICEF, as a platform for international collaborative initiatives for developing innovative technologies. Here, I'd like to touch upon the topical issue, the role of high-efficiency core technologies. Due to low cost and abundant and widely distributed reserves worldwide, and whether you like or not, coal power plants will continue to be used in developing countries. That's a fact. According to the estimate of World Resources Institute, more than 1,400 gigawatt of coal power plant projects are proposed. On the other hand, some developing countries like India are aiming at thermal efficiency improvement of their coal-fired power plants as part of their INDCs. And World Energy Outlook 2014 clearly states that if all coal-fired power plants globally achieved ultra-supercritical efficiency level by the end of 2040, coal-fired CO2 emissions in 2040 could be 17% lower than otherwise. Japan's high-efficiency coal thermal technologies could avoid CO2 emissions caused by maintaining or deploying less efficient technologies, by introducing ultra-supercritical technologies, replacing subcritical plants in non-OECD Asian countries. 1 gigaton of CO2 emissions could be avoided in 2035, as you can see in the right chart. Finally, let me give my perspective about future global framework. Having participated in the COP negotiations more than 10 times, while acknowledging its legitimacy as a global forum, I would have to say UN process entails various drawbacks. such as deep-rooted North-South confrontation and consensus-based decision-making process and bureaucracy. I don't foresee that the bottom-up president review regime will eventually evolve to a Kyoto-type legally binding stringent regime where UN function as a world government. Some think tanks and NGOs are calculating a gap between aggregated INDCs and 450 ppm scenarios and urging parties to raise their target levels. I don't think this sort of so-called gigaton gap approach will work. If we were really serious about climate change, development of transformational and innovative technologies are the key for filling such gaps. I'd think that international efforts to prevent global warming would evolve from UN-based and single-layered regime to a more multi-layered framework, encompassing not only UN framework, but also various bilateral, interregional, industrial, intercity, and sector-specific initiatives. This sort of fragmented regime may not look beautiful, but will be more pragmatic and therefore effective. Japan should play an active role in these non-UN initiatives as well, such as joint credit mechanism, public-private partnership in key sectors, and also should lead so-called coalition of willing for developing innovative technologies, since ultimate solution depends on innovative technologies, not UN negotiation rooms. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Arima, for your contribution in the role of innovation and technologies. We're gonna now hear Mr. Tezuka. He's the senior industry liaison at KEIDANREN on COP21.
Where I can start.
Tezuka-san.
Full screen mode. Okay. Oh, thank you for introduction. I'm as a representative of industries. I'm going to add some factual value or the pragmatic viewpoint on what the Arima-san mentioned before. Since the time is very limited, I just only raise 4 issues. First, why innovation is so important. Second, the UN framework, so-called new framework, is going to be a very similar to what Japan's KEIDANREN has been doing in the past. Then the third, the real issue is how we can transfer the superior technologies to the world. Then the fourth is Japanese industry is facing the carbon price or not. So those issues I'm going to briefly touch upon. The first, this is a famous Kaya identity, that the reality of CO2 emission. CO2 is not the classical the pollution kind of emission. This is a result of daily activities, result of GDP generation process. So the reducing CO2 means either while GDP is growing, particularly in the developing countries, and also population is growing in developing world, there are only 2 factors we can reduce the final CO2 emission. First is energy efficiency improvement. Second is clean energy supply. Those are the only solutions. Otherwise, you need to impose a cap on the GDP growth to limit the CO2 emission. This is a really sticky point of the UNFCCC negotiation is the following. That's the reason why there is a huge dispute among North and the South. This is why our Prime Minister Abe yesterday declared that Japan is going to allocate a lot of resources to the innovation, to create new technologies, either for the energy efficiencies or clean energy supplies. With those technologies, we can fundamentally solve this the CO2 emission problem or global warming problem. In that the aspect, KEIDANREN, Japanese Business the Industry Association, has established the so-called KEIDANREN's Action Plan for Environment as early as 1997, before Kyoto Protocol. This is basically the voluntary commitment among the industry sectors like steel, cement, power, automobile, and so forth. during the Kyoto first commitment period time, we overachieved our voluntary raised target by 12%. The original target was keeping the CO2 emission as a level of 1990s, but the final result is on average 12% reduction. But how we achieve it? Of course, the production level increased by 2% on the bottom table. So this was achievement of a 14% productivity increase or the efficiency improvement. This is basically pledge and review process. Each sector, like iron, steel, or cement, pledge their target toward Kyoto period, then started their own initiative, investing energy efficiency technologies or increased productivity and so forth. As you may see on this the picture, the right-hand side is a KEIDANREN's action plan structure. Then what we are aiming at to agreed upon in COP21 is a pledge and review that each countries are going to submit INDCs, that is a voluntary commitment to the climate change. Then the follow-up by the UN system for the achievement and the progress and the ambition increase. This is what we have done in the past years. In case of KEIDANREN's action plan, each industry sectors, each companies have submitted their achievement and the target and achievement every year to the industry organizations. Then industry organizations submitted aggregate data to KEIDANREN. Then the total progress is being evaluated and scrutinized by the third-party committees, which was established by the government. And among those industry associations, among 61 organizations, 29 organizations voluntarily raised their target level during the course of Kyoto period. Because those industry associations overachieved their original target. This is a long-term effort, but the new technologies may come up, so they can overachieve, or there is a strong peer pressure among industry the associations. So there is a very strong incentive that each industry association, or even the companies or CEOs, to overachieve their original target in the long-term process. So this is what UN is going to agreed in COP21. Basically, the structure is a pledge and review and the very transparent MRV process. So in that context, we can share our knowledge and experience, PDCA cycle, how we can follow up this the process in a very transparent manner, with the very constructive and supportive peer pressures each other. I hope that the new UN framework is going to follow this kind of a mechanism. Then, even with actually KEIDANREN has now entered into the new initiative called KEIDANREN's Commitment to New Low Carbon Society. This is the Voluntary Action Program version 2. And we are following this the process targeting at 2030. But even with this effort in the domestic the community, Japan's total emission is 1.3 billion tons, or 1.4, closely to 1.4. But there is a 15 gigaton gap exists if you consider about a 2 degrees scenario. So we need to do more, not only in the domestic the situation, but also in the international situation. This is what we now enter into together with the government of Japan. That is JCM, basically the tech transfer from Japan to primarily to developing countries, so that they can use the more energy efficient or cleaner energies for their economic development. I happen to be chairing one committee that is a public and private cooperative meeting between India and the Japanese iron steel industry. We started this initiative as early as 2011, and we had already had 5 meetings annually, and the next meeting is going to be held next February. But this is basically the cooperative the initiative between Indian steel industry and the Japanese steel industry. We know that India is now in a very the developing stage. Their current the iron steel production capacity is 70 million tons, but the capacity is going to be double in the next 10 years. That is what we heard from Indian government. So because of that, their mission is going to grow inevitably. But what kind of a technology they are going to employ for their steel making in the next decade is going to make a huge difference to the global emission level. So we sit together with the Indian Steel Ministry and the Bureau of Energy Efficiency together with METI of Japan and the NEDO and the steel industry peers, then discuss about what kind of energy efficiency technologies are most suitable for the Indian steel industry. And they agreed, and we published this technology customized list to be used for their the economic development. And also we visited several Indian steel companies for the energy efficiency diagnosis and suggested how they can improve their performance. Something like that. So this is basically the real action rather than target or rather than something written on the paper. We try to contribute, in addition to our domestic actions, we try to contribute to the global-based emission reduction effort. Finally, I'd like to just briefly touch upon what's the carbon pricing situation in Japan. Some NGOs are claiming that Japan is not introducing cap and trade like clear carbon pricing mechanism. But as early as 1978, Japan has been imposing oil and coal tax. More than 30 years. This was introduced because of the first and the second oil shock. The recent budget base or tax base of this, the oil and coal tax is more than 700 billion yen. And what is unique for this tax is that this is a dedicated tax. The budget is allocated. More than half of this budget or the tax income is dedicated to the energy efficiency improvement policies or technology development, energy-related technology development policies on the right side table of this chart. So Japan has already been imposed the heavy carbon tax, and even though the society and even the CEOs who are top executives are not recognizing that we are paying carbon tax, we are really paying the carbon tax. That's the reason why Japanese the industry efficiency level is among the best, and Japan has been Japan's the per GDP CO2 or the CO2 emission is among the minimum. Probably we have done this too early to be recognized in the recent the trend of a carbon pricing debate, but this is a factual base to be shared with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mr. Tezuka. And now we're going to talk with Dr. Kameyama. Please do your presentation. You have 7-8 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Yasuko Kameyama from National Institute for Environmental Studies, and this institute used to be a part of Ministry of the Environment in Japan, but it was privatized in 2001. Although we still get most of our fundings from the ministry, I would think our academic activity is quite independent. I didn't prepare any handouts. I want to be paperless. But if you want to have an electronic file, please contact me later. I'll be happy to send it to you. I'll be briefly explain to you more in general some of the issues to be resolved at COP21 and ways toward the future. There has been a little bit of confusion about the legal nature of instruments and the legal nature of emission targets. Those two things are quite independent of each other. Back in 1992, when the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was adopted, this instrument was, of course, an international treaty, so it's legally binding as an instrument. But inside the document, the legal nature of emission targets was non-legally binding. It was kind of voluntary target. And the problem was that not so many developed countries were quite serious in achieving the target. And actually, Japan, all the Annex 1 countries were supposed to stabilize their emissions at the level of 1990 by the year 2000. But Japan's emission actually went over the target of about 8 or 9%. So the developing countries criticized the situation and called for legally binding targets for developed countries. And that's how the Kyoto Protocol was agreed in 1997. So there, the instrument is again international treaty, so it's legally binding. And inside it, the target itself was also legally binding. I don't hear so much of the argument of top down and bottom up approach outside Japan, because most of the other countries' target was, I think, came up by themselves from their own countries. But the concern of the United States was that the legal nature of the target was legally binding. And that is why the United States withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol. And of course, many emerging economies like China and Brazil and South Africa, those countries' emissions grew quite rapidly. And that's why we need something else to cover the period after 2012. And Cancun Agreement was agreed in 2010. And that is decided by COP decisions. So it's a non-legally binding instrument. And within it, the emission targets for the year 2020 is also non-legally binding. So here, the coverage is really good. So it includes both developed and developing countries. But the problem is that the net emission targets are not legally binding. So we're not sure whether all the countries are going to be serious enough to achieve each country's own respective targets. And this time around, Paris Agreement is going to be agreed, hopefully, next month. And the Durban platform, it says that for the legal nature of the instrument, a protocol under the legal instrument or an agreed outcome with legal force under the UNFCCC. So I think as we see now, it seems that the COP21 is aiming at a package of an agreement consisting of a legal treaty and a set of COP decisions. And as for the legal nature of emission targets, it doesn't say anything in the Durban platform, but it seems that the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, are not going to be legally binding. And I'm going to speak a little bit more about the relation between an instrument with legal force and COP decisions, which are going to consist the package deal of Paris Agreement. There are 4 items which are going to be included. One is mitigation. It's about the emission reduction targets in general. Second is adaptation, about how we're going to do with a national action plan and loss and damage. And the third item is means of implementation, MOI, that includes finance, technology, and capacity building. And the fourth item is transparency. It's kind of like a reporting and reviewing and verification process, how we're going to do all those processes. And the issue is what kind of description is going to be inserted in which instrument. And there has been a lot of conflicts in still going on in the negotiation. For instance, I think the most crucial issue is shall different commitments be applied for developed and developing countries. It's a matter of differentiation. Developing countries still wants to have a clear distinction between developed countries and developing countries, 2 groups, clearly. But developed countries says that I think that's things of the past, and things are more diverse these days. Within the developing groups, there are a lot of countries which are not so much developing anymore. It's really close to developed countries. So, of course, Japan is also strongly willing to not to have that kind of two clear, distinct grouping. The second point is in which document and how should the NDCs shall be inscribed. For instance, when at the time of Kyoto Protocol, the 6% reduction target for Japan, for instance, it was inscribed in Annex B of the Kyoto Protocol, so it was part of the Kyoto Protocol. But this time, it seems that NDCs are likely to be listed outside the legal document. Are the NDCs going to be revisited, and if so, then when and how? Shall loss and damage be included in the agreement? Most of the developing countries are strongly willing to include a loss and damage context in the agreement, but most of the developed countries, including Japan, would be quite resistant not to include it, because loss and damage thing will also be related to more financial cooperation for the developing countries. Shall financial contribution be a part of NDCs? Many developing countries are hoping that the developed countries also come up with numerical targets for financial contributions to developing countries. But of course, Japan and other developed countries are not willing to do so. What kind of transparency processes shall be implemented? We need a clear guidance as to how we're going to review, periodically review and check whether we are moving toward the right direction. And I think I've explained most of the things which are on this slide, so I'll just skip it. And all of you may know that there was a report which came out end of October. It's a synthesis report from the UNFCCC. So they aggregated all the INDCs that came out from countries. So they were able to come up, to put together NDCs from 147 parties. I think now this number has gone up to more than 160, but at the time of 1st of October, there were 147 parties. And what they found out was that because of the INDCs, the emissions, global emissions are likely to be a little bit, oh, here it is, yeah, you see this yellow small bar. So it's a little bit less than what was expected without INDCs, a business as usual scenario, but still it is not enough to achieve the long-term 2 degrees target. So we need to further raise the level of ambition of INDCs. But how? This is the issue. And so what kind of policies are effective? It would be my question. And of course, I fully agree with what the two previous speakers have spoken about the present review system. I think it's a really good system to periodically review the progress, but I hope you understand that it is a system for transparency, improving the transparency, and it's not really a system to improve the level of mitigation. So we need something in addition to the pure, just a pure pledge and review system. And I also agree with Tezuka-san that the technologies are really important, and it's really the part of the solution. But the technology has to be put together with the right policies to be widely diffused in a very short time. And although the countries are quite different from one country to each other, I think there are 3 goals which must be achieved under any circumstance. The first goal is decarbonization of energy, and second goal is improvement of energy efficiency, and the third goal is minimizing demand for energy service. And I think I distributed this small brochure, and this is a new research project that I'm conducting from this year, fiscal year, and I don't have any time to explain to you detail about this project, but here there is a whole list of policies and measures which will be quite effective in reaching those three goals. So I hope you have time to look at this brochure later. And as Arima Sensei said, there has been a lot of initiatives going on by non-state actors. So I would hope that you take a look at what's going on inside Japan, and not only the national government, but a lot of things has been going on at local governments level, and also the businesses and also citizens groups. There's been a lot of interesting activities going on. So I can explain to you more later if you have any questions, but I'll just show you this slide, and this will be the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kameyama. Well, before to go to the question and answer, I'd like to come back to you, Tom. And we heard a lot of things, of course, presented today. One thing I haven't heard, I think, is about the discrepancy that we have in this discussion between the years of development by countries. You know, you have the Americans on the one side, or the Europeans who are going to say, well, we can figure out such figures because this and this. But they've been developing since the Industrial Revolution, 1870, let's say. So you have countries like China who say, no, we want to develop ourselves also, and we haven't had that time to develop. So how can we reduce the gap in between these two positions?
Right. Well, I mean, I think, you know, those of you who are involved in the renewable energy business know that there are obviously, as the previous speaker said, there are technologies out there where you can actually, you know, generate GDP without actually, you know, pushing more CO2 into the atmosphere. So I think, you know, the Chinese are working on that. Obviously, they're the biggest investors in wind and solar. There are obviously huge challenges as well. You know, Indonesia is one. Obviously, they're pushing out 2.4, you know, gigatons of CO2. So undoubtedly, there are challenges out there. Yeah, but I think the technologies are there to enable some of these countries to decarbonize, and Japan has many of those technologies. So this should be a significant opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're gonna have the question and answer session. So if you have any question, please raise your hand, and once you're recognized, approach the microphone. Any question there? From journalists, working press, I see. Yeah, Peter, please.
Peter Langen, I'm a journalist in between jobs. Sir David King is the UK rep on climate change and spoke here earlier this year. One thing that struck me from his speech was that actually the issue is not climate change. The real issue is sea change, that is rising sea levels. So he pointed out that cities like Tokyo, Shanghai, Kolkata, London, all would be faced with outright destruction, mass migration from those cities. So it seems to me that if that is the biggest single threat, or would you agree that is the biggest single threat from rising temperatures, are governments doing enough about it, like to prepare for that possibility and make sure the public is sufficiently informed? The second question, if I may, is he also emphasized that a solution as reforestation. And again, I'm not hearing myself, maybe mistaken, enough in the debate or in the talks about climate change, about reforestation and funding for that as a mitigator. Thank you.
Who would you like to ask your questions, Peter? All of the panelists? Okay, who wants to answer?
Anybody who would like to answer.
Who would like to answer this question? Hello, Ms. Arima-san? Tom? Okay, Arima-san, dozo.
Okay. Of course, I'm not an expert on reforestation, but I'd try. And the first question about sea level changes, of course, there is such a risk. So that is why the Paris conference is quite important for reducing global greenhouse gas emissions. And I think many governments have clear recognition of the potential danger of the climate change. On the other hand, as you know, many governments are also facing with short-term political agenda. if they have the recession in front of them, they have to be very much attentive to the cost reduction of the daily life and so on. So the biggest challenge for the climate change agenda, not only limited to sea level change or reforestation issues, but more general, is the gap between the long-term nature of the climate change and short-termism of each government, which is subject to election every 4 years. So how can we bridge that gap? So as you say, we have to say, first, disseminate various information to general public about the potential implication of climate change, raising their awareness so that the long-term, sustainable climate change policies could be well received by general public. That is a common challenge for not only for Japan, but also many countries. Reforestation, yes, this is also fully recognized. So while I was engaged in post-2013 negotiation, there was reduction of deforestation and also degradation. And one of the very much important elements was reforestation. Of course, Japan may be not big enough country for reforestation, but there are many other countries which could be suitable for reforestation. But before doing so, we have to reduce deforestation in many developing countries. So that is what I can say at this point in time. Thank you.
Tom, please.
Joel, if I could add as well, obviously the sea level rises are critical issues for cities like, I guess, New York is often mentioned, Miami is mentioned as well. But Peter, in case you're not aware, there is a list of the vulnerable 20, the 20 countries that are most exposed to climate change. And Syria, I think, is on that list. Afghanistan is on that list as well. So I think there may be more immediate challenges. Particularly a lot of the problems that are mentioned in connection with Syria, they say are relate to droughts in that country, which is exacerbating the migration issues, So definitely the sea level rises are important, but there may be more immediate challenges for the poorer countries. And I think Bangladesh is also listed as one of those countries, Bhutan and several other. And of course, then you have the situation with Kiribati, where they may have to vacate the island at some point, if things deteriorate. Yeah. I would agree with Arima Sensei on the reforestation. I think and David King as well. That's something that needs to happen. Indonesia is a case in point where they're cutting forests at an incredibly fast pace, which seems to be creating very serious issues for them.
Tezuka-san, you wanted to add something, I think.
I'm not an expert on this area. I'm much more on the energy saving kind of the person. But just like to add one issue, that is sea level rise is a very gradual phenomenon, not like typhoon hitting or tsunami hitting whole coastal area of Japan. So maybe we need to carefully watch what the real trend is going to be. And however, having said this, the IPCC AR5, almost all of the scenarios they raised for the cutting the CO2 emission by 2100 by halving or 80% reduction. Those scenarios, all those scenarios are, assuming the overshooting. The temperature will rise over 2 degrees, then a drop down because of the massive effort in a global base. So during the course of that trend, if the global warming will really cause an impact on sea level, we need to prepare for that anyway. Whatever effort we are going to focus on the mitigation area, because overshooting will happen unless we have the clean energy supply system technologies in the relatively shorter term. So that is probably why the UN negotiations is now more focusing on putting more focus on adaptation, not only in addition to the mitigation areas. But that is the very the new area where how the global-based cooperation can be worked, how much money we should put, and how business can contribute, and so forth. There's a relatively small, proven approaches to financing such kind of the areas. So we must be very innovative to cope with this the very fundamental problem.
I know innovation and technologies are your favorite word together.
Yeah.
I know, Dr. Kameyama, I'd like to ask you about the reforestation. It was something very much addressed in the Kyoto Protocol time.
Yes. In my slide, there was a small picture of a tree there. And of course, around 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions comes from deforestation, and also because of burning forests. So it's really a big part of the solution. But still, again, I really agree with what Arima said, that stopping the deforestation is the priority. And afterwards, there should be, of course, reforestation. And actually, countries like China and also India, they're starting a lot of reforestation. And the forest area has been increasing. It's a really good message, I think. Thank you.
Peter, are you okay? You want follow up? Any working journalist? I think I've seen some hands over there. No? Okay. You have a question? Yes. It's about the COP21, right? Yes. Okay. No history talks and so on, right? Good.
My name is Hiroyuki, independent journalist, write for Yukan Fuji. I'm also a member of the Scientists for Accurate Radiation Information Survey. And thanks for the business presentation. Innovation is always good, and it's a good untapped money opportunity. But just thinking of the real solution of the issues concerned, I have to say that one of the realistic, proven source of energy effective for minimizing CO2 is nuclear power generation. Why is it not included in your presentation? Or I'd like to know your view on nuclear power generation for this particular issue, COP20.
Thank you. So who would you like to ask the question first?
Yeah. Though the Joel restricted the time of my presentation to 7 minutes, so I could not touch upon everything. But as you have the distribution of East Japan's INDC underwhelming, there is a clear indication of the Japanese energy mix, which is the basis for the 26% reduction target. And there, we clearly state that 22 to 20% percentage of the total power generation should come from nuclear, recognizing that restarting nuclear is the most cost-effective way for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, together with, say, solving energy security issues and so reducing energy cost. So we clearly understand the nuclear is the big solution for Japan. It is not the only solution. We have to do energy efficiency and we have to expand renewables, but nuclear is indispensable piece for Japan. And concerning the treatment of nuclear in the international fora, as you know, there are marked difference about approaches among countries vis-à-vis nuclear. On one hand, Japan and the UK are aiming at, say, utilizing nuclear, and France as well, even though they are reducing the share of nuclear from 75 to 50%. On the other hand, there are countries like Germany or Denmark or the Ireland, which do not like nuclear as a solution. So that is fine. Each country has its specific national strategy. But for such countries as Japan, which do not have any fossil resources, and so which do not have any international grid connection, for us, nuclear is indispensable. So though I did not clearly mention in my presentation, but that recognition is clearly reflected in Japanese energy mix.
Any other comment? Tom?
If I could add just on the international scene, obviously the president of the World Bank has come out in the last couple of days as well, saying that part of their balance sheet, is potentially usable for development of nuclear power. And of course, there are new nuclear technologies as well that Bill Gates is pursuing and that people, in California are actively pursuing. So they should be in the context of new technologies that Tezuka-san mentioned. That's also something that should be looked at. Incidentally, the World Bank have just announced a $16 billion investment program in Africa to build out their energy infrastructure, as I understand it. So this is a major commitment to the Africa, at least.
Most of our, yes,
Yeah,
please.
just like to, I completely agree with what Arima-san mentioned, but actually KEIDANREN has been supporting the restarting of nuclear, which is very necessary for the Japanese economy to come back. Not only in Japan, but in a global base, here is a very interesting situation that the people are hating about the coal is also hating about the nuclear. So the agenda is set like coal replaced by renewable solar and the wind, but the coal and the renewables are fundamentally the different kind of the electricity supplies, because the coal is a very dispatchable, very high density energy supply, while solar and the wind are very intermittent and shallow kind of technologies. So the immediate replacement between coal is not the renewable, but nuclear. So, but unfortunately, the world debate is either coal or renewable. That is a wrong way of establishing debate. My background is physics, so I know this is the kind of what should I say, non-engineering, non-scientific kind of debate at this time moment. Of course, we need to have real clean, dispatchable, dense, renewable energy. But that is to be coming after the massive investment of innovations.
Kameyama-san, do you have something to say for the agency you work with?
Yeah, just one word is that I think there is something to learn in the past experience in Japan, and that before the March 11 accident, I think Japan was relied on nuclear energy, and that is why Japan was really far behind in renewable. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, so I have nothing to say what we should do from the future, but I think putting a lot of push on renewable is the priority. And let's see what happens with some of the other parts of the energy source.
Thank you. Precisely, follow up on that. We heard a lot about the coal power plants. Let me just quote you a report published in Les Echos, economical daily in France, yesterday or 2 days ago, encouraging, according to some think tanks, some organizations, banking or investors, not to go into the fossil fuels. In other words, not to promote too many technologies, for example, for the coal power plants. Yeah? What is your opinion about that? Are the bankers sensitive to that?
Yes, and I think this is a very much interesting debate, and that entails what would you see the baseline in the energy reality, not only in developed countries, but also in developing countries. And in many developing countries, still many population lacks the access to modern type of energy, namely electricity. And on the other hand, coal is very much cheap and abundant and distributed worldwide, not only in Middle East. No, there is no coal resources in Middle East, but there are many massive coal resources in Asian countries. So, well, whether you like or not, that is inevitable that coal will continue to be used. That's a baseline I have in mind. Then, setting that baseline in mind, then what we should do, if we eliminate any financing to coal thermal technologies, then would developing countries go towards natural gas, renewable, or even nuclear? My answer would be no, because for them, the utmost priority is to ensure the access to modern type of energy for poor population. So if that is a baseline, then what we should aim at is ensure the utilization of as efficient coal thermal technology as possible. So encouraging replacement of the subcritical thermal power with supercritical or ultra supercritical thermal power technologies. That is a solution. Otherwise, if we eliminate the access to, say, concession loans to high ultra supercritical technologies, just on the ground that this is a fossil fuel technology, then what will happen? They will aim at more low efficiency core technologies. Cheaper, but low efficiency, and that will increase CO2 emissions. So I think the argument that we should eliminate new investment, any kind of new investment in fossil fuel thermal technologies is beautiful on paper, but in reality, it is not, say, fully reflecting the energy reality in the real world.
Thank you. Any comment? Tom, please.
Yeah, Joel, I was just, obviously, I touched on the remarks by the Governor of the Bank of England, who happens to be a Canadian, actually, but I mean, he's...
It's him who said so, right?
I'm sorry? Yes,
It's
I mean, he
him.
said that 2/3 of the fossil fuels have to stay in the ground, you know, so I think that needs to be explored. He's also talked about reviewing the balance sheets of the oil and gas companies in terms of stranded assets. We've seen Shell recently that have, you know, have backed out of the Arctic. I think there may be some discussion in the Obama administration about actually oil and gas pipelines, you know, saying that no more should be built, you know, so this is kind of taking it to the extreme, but I think this is Total, you know, the French oil and gas company have said they're going to move a significant part of their investments into clean energy. I think they've said 500 million euros, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, huge discussions happening around divestment, investment programs, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have questions? I open the floor to members and non-journalists, including. I think you open. You stand your hand, please. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Kåberger. Journalistically, I contribute to several journals with columns, but I'm also a former Director General of the Energy Agency in Sweden. I'm on the board of Europe's 5th largest power company, and I work in Japan with renewable energy. I totally agree with what you clearly said about the relationship between the energy supply system and the economic development and the importance of technology. But one piece of information that I found a little difficult to understand is the marginal cost curve and the very high marginal cost for Japan of $380 per ton to reach minus 26%. In Sweden, we have a carbon tax of about $120 per ton in the heating sector, and that has removed 95% of the fossil fuels from the heating sector. With much lower carbon tax, we removed all fossil fuels from the electricity generation. And when we are now passing 10% renewable fuels in the transport sector, we're talking about a fossil fuel transport sector by 2030, then we reach something like $300 per ton to totally remove fossil fuels from the transport sector. So I wonder, how can you reach such a high marginal cost in Japan? Are you thinking of doing something completely different from what we're doing in Japan? Or are you taking into account these sort of homemade costs in Japan with regulation making some of these renewable, sustainable alternatives more difficult here, a less open electricity market and things like that?
Who would you like to ask the question to? Arima-san or?
I think Arima-san was the one who gave the data,
Okay.
so
but
he could possibly explain.
Tezuka-san talked also a lot about the carbon tax. So. Go on.
Okay, thank you very much. And by the way, nice to see you again. We met in probably Berlin, I think. And concerning a question about $380 per ton CO2, of course, that is a result of the model analysis. But the underlying thinking is that Japan has already achieved a very much high level of energy efficiency. So therefore, additional reduction tends to be more costly in Japan. And also, in introducing additional renewables, for example, Japan does not have sufficient land, and also and also as for the wind powers, we have a stringent regulation in the national park and so on. So there is some, handicaps in Japan for further expansion of renewables. And you might argue, as a head of the Renewable Energy Foundation, but that is the underlying consideration of $380 per ton CO2. And in the case of Sweden, I very much envy the Sweden's energy mix, that because half of the power is coming from hydro and half of the power is coming from nuclear. So if we could replicate the same energy mix in Japan, then we could reduce CO2 emissions much more cost effectively. So, and also Sweden has a very much good connection with other Nordic countries like Norway and Denmark, and you are, compensating the pros and cons of each country's energy structures. So the big difference between Japan and the European country is, as I said, Japan does not have any inter-country, international grid connection. So that is a big handicap, but we cannot solve this problem overnight. And I'd like to say one more thing. If Japan cannot restart nuclear power plants as planned, then the marginal abatement cost would further increase, because that $380 per ton CO2 is assuming the current energy mix, assuming 22% of the power is coming from nuclear power. So if that does not come true, and if that same target should be, say, achieved by raising energy efficiency or raising share of renewables, then that would be clearly more costly than restarting nuclear power plants. Then $380 per ton CO2 with further rise.
Tezuka-san, どうぞ。
If you carefully look at the Japan's energy mix announcement, which was made in June, and also in combination with a 26% reduction INDC target, the real improvement not necessarily come from electricity side, because the 2030 electricity mix is a much higher renewables. That is costly, but just coming back to pre-earthquake energy mix situation. That time nuclear was about 30%. Of course, much smaller than that. But so the real cost comes not from supply side, but from demand side. That energy, the INDC, assuming that the very massive, almost 40%, around 40% energy efficiency improvement or energy usage reduction in house and distribution and the service sectors. The industry sectors, there is a relatively little room to improve further. So the much more focus is on the houses, buildings, service sectors, transportation, those areas. For those areas to improve energy efficiency by 40% means replacement of massive scale of capital goods. Rebuilding the buildings or houses and the offices to the zero-emission buildings, zero-emission housings, the very high the efficiency was zero-emission trucks or the cars and so forth for distributing. This requires huge investment. That I think that is a source of the high abatement cost calculation. We claim that we do need economic growth to really do such kind of a capital goods replacement investment in the next 15 years. So the Abenomics must be successful. Otherwise, we cannot do that kind of a replacement of capital goods.
Yeah. Are you all right with the answer, or you have a comment? If you want to have a follow-up, also. I like the debate to open.
If I may. What I meant was that with these high carbon taxes, other alternatives are competitive. And if you are considering the transport sector, you could do totally renewable fuels at a lower carbon price than $380 per barrel, per ton. That should be possible in Japan as it is possible in other parts of the world. It is not a matter of local resources. You can even import biofuels at those levels. And the competitiveness in the electricity sector is not only a matter of nuclear and hydro, it's wind power outcompeting fossil fuel-fired power plants in neighboring countries and wherever. I can't see that should be more expensive in Japan. $380 a barrel, you can do floating wind power plants at that price in Europe. $380 per ton, yeah, you could do floating.
Okay. Arima-san?
Don't misunderstand that $380 per ton CO2 is applied to all the percentage from 1% below 2013 to 26% below 2013. That is the marginal abatement cost. So marginal cost will gradually increase from -1% to -26%. So at the end of the 26%, the cost will reach to $380 per ton CO2. So that is the first point. And the second point is, you claim that Japan should aim at, say, replacing all the gasoline fuels with biofuels.
I just say that if you had that high price on carbon, that would be a profitable opportunity. I think you will reach larger reductions at lower carbon prices.
Yeah, and as I said, that is not the imposition of $380 per ton CO2 from the scratch. So that's a gradual increase. So that is probably the source of some, how can I say, perception gap between us and you, I think.
I think you have a question, Kurt. Before your question, I would like to come back to Tom and ask you, I mean, this is a clear example of where things can't work very easily for those who are going to debate in Paris to try to match the points and opinions. So where are the points where we will definitely agree in Paris?
Well, I mean, I would say on the technology side and renewable energy, definitely, I would say there's a huge international commitment to increasing the share of renewable energy in the energy mix around the world. And particularly so, I think this needs to be accelerated in the developing countries. And we didn't talk so much about India here, but I think the world now regards India as being the next big, huge challenge, you know, post-China and post-economic, I shouldn't say stagnation, but, you know, the fact that they're not importing as much oil and gas as they used to. But I think the next huge challenge will be India. So it will be very interesting to see, you know, where Prime Minister Modi stands, you know, next week in particular. Yeah, but I would say renewable energy would have to be where you know we should see some significant, and energy efficiency possibly as well. Yeah.
Kurt, dozo.
Yeah, my name is Kurt Sieber. I'm an associate member and not an expert on energy in general, but I have quite some interests in renewables. And I was a little bit disappointed this morning when I opened the Japan Times and I read that Environmental Minister Marukawa mentions that coal technology exports remain a priority. You have already given partially the explanation because Japan technology is very, very efficient compared with coal technology which is available in the rest of the world. However, it is still less efficient than most of the other energies like LNG and so on. But going to the renewables once more, I would like to add some positive factor to the...
Question.
Yeah, the question will come. I'm Swiss, but I'm also closely connected to Austria. Austria just recently announced, and I agree with you, they have 26% in hydro, but one of the states of the Austrian Federation has reached 100% actual use of renewables, and Austria as the total country has now reached 75%. So I would still like to hear from you, and I agree with the intermediate nuclear power necessity. How do you see the long-term future for renewables in Japan?
Who would like to answer that question? Arima-san.
Of course, we very much expect the further expansion of renewables in Japan. And each country has its own economic and energy circumstances. And I very much envy Austria, which has very much abundant hydro resources. And I have been to Austria several times, and I've been very much impressed with beautiful lake, and also which is very much suitable for hydropower generation. And Austria also has a very good grid connection with neighboring countries, so you can import and export. So I think unlike Austria or other European countries, Japan, as repeatedly said, does not have any international grid connection. So we have to produce all the power which is to be consumed in Japan. So we cannot envisage 100% renewable in Japan. We have to strike the best mix in Japan. And for such country as Japan, we need both nuclear and renewable. We need both non-fossil and fossils. And eventually, if we say successfully develop CCS technologies, or if eventually we develop a successfully high efficiency battery or next generation battery technologies, then that will further increase the penetration of renewables. But quite often the domestic debate in Japan is nuclear or renewable. That's completely nonsense debate to my mind. We need both nuclear and renewables. And don't misunderstand me, I'm not underestimating the potential of renewable in Japan. I very much hope that renewable will play more important role in Japan, but we need technology development, and we need various other energy mixes to energy sources to satisfy Japan's energy needs, reflecting Japan's specific national and energy circumstances.
Okay, you have a question, I think. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Cecilia Tam from the Asia Pacific Energy Research Center. I have a question for any of the panelists about what we could expect from COP in terms of financial commitments. And the reason I ask this is because I agree with all of you that technology is going to be the main solution. And I think we have the technologies that we need to address a lot of the mitigation efforts, and developing countries have shown willingness to adopt these technologies. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to an issue of how they're going to pay for these cleaner and more efficient technologies. And so I wondered if any of you want to comment on whether COP in Paris will lead to some surprises, positive surprises on additional financial commitments to allow the sort of more rapid diffusion of the technologies that we need. Thank you.
Kameyama-san, do you want to answer this question?
Okay, well, maybe Arima.
Arima-san? Okay, Tezuka-san.
The right person.
Who do you want to answer? Dozo.
Actually, I happen to be one of the members of a private sector advisory group to the Green Climate Fund. So we have been discussing about how we can combine public money with private sector money to enhance the effort. That is a very, very critical question. And as I mentioned, we must have many creative solutions or ideas to do this. But one thing is that obviously energy efficiency improvement is relatively easier because there is a positive cash flow you can expect from investment. Even though the capital or the first capital investment is very expensive, like ultra supercritical coal power plant is obviously much more expensive than the ordinary coal power plant. But because of the higher efficiency, you can get bigger cash flow from the investment. So the real incentive you need to provide to the developing countries are making the difference, or the feeling the difference between the better technologies and the old technologies. If the older technologies are the 5 years payback period, and better technologies are 5 years payback period, then old technologies are 3 years payback period. You need to fill the gap between those 2 years. So you don't need to put whole public money into this kind of a formula. Otherwise, other than in addition to the incentive, the private sector money will automatically put from because of the higher cash flow base. So we need to think about that kind of the leveraging mechanism. And I just raised the issue of energy efficiency improvement or efficiency improvement the issues. But in other areas such as the renewables investment, another cash flow based the technologies. So there must be some suitable way of financing such. In that sense, with minimum public money injection, you can leverage with the private sector money to realize a massive scale of investment in everywhere in the world. But that is not necessarily really understood and not necessarily really deployed in a developing financing area. So we need to think about much further about this kind of situation.
Tom, about financing.
Yeah, Cecilia, thank you for the question. I mean, the number, by all accounts, is about 100 billion from developed into developing countries. I think the ambassador touched on this, Peter, earlier in the week, and he said that there had been significant progress in actually meeting that target. But as well, I mean, obviously, the investment, I think the numbers for 2014 have just been released. So there was $400 billion invested in renewable energy globally in 2014. So that was a combination of private sector and public sector money. So I think the money's there. You know, the IMF seem to be extremely committed to renewable energy as well. I assume they will push their member banks to do the same. Citibank have just come out and said that they will, and invest another 100 billion. Bank of America have done the same. So you would hope, especially in the low interest rate environment, that the money should be available.
Thank you very much. There is a point we haven't talked about, but it is also important, not related directly to the negotiation, the figures, the financing. It's the geopolitical impact of this issue. I have a photo here of Saldago. You remember this photo? This is in Kuwait in 1991, and those are Canadian firemen. And you see the two men are kind of afflicted by the situation. They're trying to work hard to end these fires. And there's a man on the right who seemed to be praying, praying, trying to have the help for resolving this problem. So we have maybe an opportunity for a second session once about more geopolitical aspect of what is in the environment issue here today. So thank you all for coming today. I would like to ask you to join me to thank our guest speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you have any Meshi exchange to do, please come there. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.